this is still an incredible slugfest for the next 6 turns. And there it is. So I'll stop there. Questions?
Anybody have any questions? Now's the time to ask. One thing I want to point out is, which we've talked about before, those porous socks, which you showed right away, how you set up those concentric attacks. It really was shown perfectly there because you're able to get around everybody and get behind them and get those benefits for on the attack, which is huge for the Warsaw Pact on the opening salvo.
Right. So, I mean, as an example, were this NATO's turn, if you would come down with me to Hex 4215, down there by the Thurungerwald, this armored unit can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right into the Soviet rear. So, I mean, this is just an example of the question, who is in whose rear? Because in this game, what you get are these swirling tank battles where both sides are outflanking each other. I'll outflank you, you'll then outflank me, I'll outflank you, and that is the true meaning of a swirling tank battle. This is not a linear game in any way, shape, or form. Neither side has enough units to form a solid line. So what you end up is corps facing off against armies in a direct slugfest, with each side trying to edge through any gap they've been able to create or that the other guy has left for them. And sometimes you can leave a gap as a trap. So up here, I've deliberately left this gap in Hex 3719 because I am daring the Soviet player to do something like this, at which point the Germans are going to counterattack from the north and the Americans would counterattack from the south. I would take out the East German 7th tank and I would leave the Soviets stranded and easy to pick off later. So be careful of the opportunities that are out there. They might be a trap. Okay, there's a good question. I'm not a modern guy, but I was wondering, have you played through a game that didn't end in nukes? Absolutely. So one of my playtesters said something that I think is a very accurate description of this game. It is a finely balanced game. And having played it hundreds of times, I will absolutely warrant that. But what he said is, NATO is like a knife edge. One side or the other is going to fall off pretty quickly. So if it is the Soviets who fall off the knife edge, then NATO can hold, and the Soviets don't get anywhere near the Rhine. However, if NATO is the one who falls off the knife edge, then the Soviets generally can get to the Rhine. They tend to get to the Rhine. I'm going to use a breakthrough marker. They tend to get to the Rhine right here. These become the critical hexes. And what Fred and I have seen any number of times is that the NATO player ends up nuking the Soviets when they cross. I would say Fred has a predilection for using nukes. I generally don't. That's really more ideological on my part, but I just don't get the point of incinerating Western Europe to save it. But I would say that nukes are probably going to be used maybe 1 out of 4 times in this game. And the nuke rules, I hated the nuclear rules in the original game. They were really terrible, and it was because I didn't believe that there was any point to modeling a tactical nuclear war, because I figured when the first nuke went off, everybody would fire off everything. But I rather like these rules, so it uses a tit-for-tat system. The player who throws the first nuke has a 1/6 chance of losing the game instantly because he just triggered Armageddon. But if he didn't trigger Armageddon, then his opponent gets a free nuke. You can basically use a nuke once and he doesn't have to roll for Armageddon. However, if he threw the second nuke, now 2 nukes have been thrown. So now he would be rolling on a 1 or a 2 would cause Armageddon. So you're never going to roll. There's no statistical possibility that your 6th nuke doesn't trigger Armageddon. So you get a limited tactical warfare up to a point, and if you want to go past that, you're going to end the world. So you can throw nukes around, but you got to be really careful because you don't get to do it more than a couple of times before you've probably lost the game anyway.
Hey, Bruce, I'd like to add something about game balance.
Please.
There's been some questions been asked about it, because everyone, it kind of feels like people think if the Soviets are pushing up against the Rhine, the game's over. But if you do the math, and what I see a lot is the Soviets do get to the Rhine, but they don't capture much on the way, even though the follow-ons, the cities that get cut off are going to count. If you don't get into the Ruhr and get to 3-point cities, there's a chance that the game's going to hang at points around the draw or maybe even a NATO marginal victory. And this is one of the brilliant parts of Bruce's design. He understands math a lot better than I do, but this game is designed to have you continue to fight when all seems lost, because you still could win by points. And as I've been telling people lately, it's to keep you from getting what I call the Russian campaign syndrome, where the Germans would attack for 2 years and then they don't get to Moscow and they go, okay, I quit. And the Soviet guy goes, hey, I'm just about to counterattack. I don't want to play anymore. If you really understand how NATO is to play this game can go right down to the last turn, and you really don't know who's going to win or not. I got a situation going right now in the game I'm doing online where it is 2 points away from being a draw, but in the last turn, there's a possibility of getting 4 units across the Rhine and getting enough victory points. So the last turn is going to be exciting, and it's going to be possible. I mean, yes, you can fall off early in this game, but it can also go all the way to the end. And that's one reason why, if you notice, I posted this spreadsheet we did today. The one problem I always had with playing this game was keeping track of where the victory level was at. And yet, so don't give up and don't let that high dead pile convince you that you're losing, because death doesn't mean who's winning in this game. NATO has to counterattack, and counterattack causes losses. And you can't just take it defensive. So I find that really exciting, that a really good game happens in the last 7 turns of this game. And don't give up in the first 7. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I know this might be early in the game, but would you anticipate the Soviets using chemical assets here?
You see, I'm the dirty war fighter in the play testing. This is Fred again. The problem with the chemicals is that they can be highly effective because you can use them to shut down flanks with the persistent, because they stay there. The problem is the Soviets will take 1 point hit every turn from the turn they started. So you really want to time when to use that, if you're going to use it at all. That can cause you to lose the game, or hand it over to a NATO marginal victory. Now,
Right.
some people might say, well, what's the realism in that? Well, we looked at this, and Bruce pointed this out. If you look at the 73 war, when the Egyptians tried to get over the canal and end the war quickly and go to a strengthened negotiation, you could see almost the same thing happening here. Both sides knew that the war was not going to last long because, as you can see, the deaths are going to be too high. And the Soviets knew their logistics were going to run out pretty fast. So the idea is to grab as much as you can. They have a lot of strength, and to end this war before it goes bad and goes nuclear, and then you go to your negotiation table and you try to negotiate from strength. And that kind of happens at the end of this game. You start grabbing for points because the peace table is going to happen, and you need to have bargaining chips. So you
And
start
yeah,
fighting it near the end. And I think that's realistic.
Fred makes an interesting point. There actually is an armistice and a negotiation process in this game. You don't have to use it, but we could be at a point where I say, I tell you what, I'll offer you a marginal victory, and we can stop here. And you can say, I think I can get a strategic victory, so I'm not going to accept your armistice offer. Right? And so either player can offer an armistice under terms at any point in time. And I've never seen that in war games, but we do it where a player just says, well, let's just quit here and call that an X victory. But here there's actually a formal process in the rules for negotiating an armistice and accepting it or not. But Fred is absolutely right. The victory conditions were balanced, and this should be of interest to everybody. They were balanced under the assumption that the Soviets were going to get every city on the North German plain up to Apeldoorn, but none in the Ruhr, that they were going to be able to take Cassel and Flensburg so they would get up to the Danish border, but they wouldn't get any cities in Denmark, except Copenhagen. It assumes that they do ultimately pick up Berlin, and then that in the south, they pick up Regensburg and Nuremberg, and that's it. If the Soviets can do better than that, they can win on victory points. But that's not easy to do better than that.
Yes,
The
and
Ruhr holds like a rock.
You
the
just came up with your catchphrase for the game.
Which is?
Death doesn't determine who wins.
Yes. That's a good catchphrase. I'll give you that. Fred, you were going to say.
The interesting thing is that the problem with the chemicals is, in the game that I'm playing right now, the Soviets have overrun southern Germany. So they got all the things that Bruce said and southern Germany, and they're still not winning the game because they had to use chemicals on game turn 7, and for the rest of the game they got nailed the 8 points, and that hurt them badly. But they had to do it because the Germans broke through and were threatening to take 2 cities, which is a sudden death for the Warsaw Pact. And the only way to stop them was to hit them with chemicals. So there's some built-in tough choices sometimes in this game that really can throw it in interesting directions. And to answer the nuke question, Bruce and I had a long discussion over how nukes would be used, and we kind of designed this as looking at what the French policy was. The French said any invasion of West Germany was considered a direct threat to France, and that a direct threat to France was a use of nuclear weapons against the enemy. And we felt that if France looked like it was going to be attacked proper, and any crossing of the Rhine really threatens that, then the nukes would be used, because all the Russians have to do is get one unit across the Rhine and it's game over. Well, they get it across the Rhine, and then NATO in the next turn takes the chance and blows it away with a nuke. And to me, that replicates the French policy. So it's we kind of threw that unique little thing in. And what it turns out to be is what Bruce said to me the other day: when are the Russians going to learn not to cross the Rhine? And what you have to do is you really got to get to the Rhine in force, so you cross with enough units in enough different hexes where throwing the nukes at you isn't going to matter, because you're going to lose the game by going to Armageddon. So it makes that rush to the Rhine a little more deliberate than just trying to get 1 or 2 units over. You got to get a lot over to really make it effective. Otherwise, that one hex is going to get blown away, and they're probably going to survive the Armageddon roll. So, nukes can be used and chemicals can be used, but there's a lot of disincentive to do it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like if the Soviets are going to use chemicals, it's a two-edged sword for them. It really is. It can
Precisely, because that question about chemicals comes down to this. If I use chemicals, particularly if I'm using it from turn 1, it is highly unlikely that I'm going to get enough victory points to win, because of the headwind of the 14 victory points I will lose. However, if I cross the Rhine and I'm still there at the end of the next NATO player turn, I win a decisive victory. So if you use chemicals, you're basically saying, okay, I'm not worried about victory points. I'm going for a decisive victory by crossing the Rhine, which is a perfectly legitimate strategy to take. On the other hand, the Soviets can easily win this game on victory points, but then they've got to be really careful about when or even if they ever use chemical weapons. So, it's a threat, and it could be used at any point in time. But if you do use it, you're pretty much committing that you're going to get across the Rhine or bust.
Yeah, and that's the really neat thing about this game is there are strategic and operational decisions that you got to decide on at some point. I'm going to do it this way, and then you go for it. And you just can't start crossing the border and hammering away at NATO. You've got to have a plan, and you got to go for it and make it work. You can decide, I'm going to go after Denmark or not. Denmark's looks easy and it's not. It's a tough cookie, and you can actually get bogged down in it. But if you don't watch the flank, you'll have suddenly a bunch of NATO units popping up on that northern flank. So those are the kind of problems that Bruce has thrown at you in this game, and I think they're really neat. Because and I'll be honest with you, there's a seeing the elephant because this game plays different from many other games, and there's a lot of nuance in the tactical application of the fight here that you got to pick up on, and we kind of didn't want to give away all the little secrets because some of the joy is in learning, usually by pain, on how to play this game.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things that we could have put in the player's notes that would have given the store away, but we haven't. But a player who's played this game 10 times is going to wipe the floor with a player who's only played it once. You know, I hate a game where I take it off the shelf, I play it once, there's only one way to play it, you crack the code on it, it's like, okay, I'm done here, I'll play the game the same way every time. You will never play NATO the same way every time. The game system doesn't let you do it. And if you play the War of Nerves scenario, which is a complicated scenario, but it's the real scenario, it gives you the boiling the frog effect of setting up your wartime strategy by what you do during your peacetime preparations as the Soviets. But you could play the War of Nerves scenario 100 times, and every single game would be unique.
Yeah, and a cool thing is after you kind of get the game down, you play a real serious 1983 strategic surprise, and then you set up the 1988 one and see how different the game plays. And it doesn't appear that it's a different game, but oh, that American Army in 1988 is something to deal with. And it shows that Reagan era increase and what it did. You actually can do air-land battle with a massive American counterattack if you play it right, and it's really kind of cool.
Yeah, Fifth Corps is a force to be reckoned with.
I actually I have a comment on the 88 scenario. I was looking through the rule book and I noticed that generally speaking, obviously in 88 the NATO forces get stronger. But I also noticed that the victory point requirements are like around I'm go back by memory, but around 5 points less for the Russians. And I also noticed that for activating the Belarusian front, it gives away 5 victory points. I was wondering, would a good 1988 strategy for the Warsaw Pact be to give up the 5-point difference and just immediately activate the Belarusian front, get all those units in right away as soon as possible?
Well,
You know,
we'll leave that up to you to play it out and find out whether it's good or not. That's what the neat thing is that's in there for you to make a decision and to see how it plays. That's
very
a
good
seeing the
answer,
elephant
Fred.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
I would like to try that out. I think that'd be a good strategy as a pact player.
That's one thing I've always done with this as I was playtesting was and sometimes Bruce will go, "Why are you doing the same thing again?" I'm going, "Well, I just want to see how different this acts and this does." And I learned the game that way, and I lost a lot doing that. But you also, I mean, that's how the Army actually war games. They'll try. They only change one thing at a time each time they run it, and that way you can focus on that one specific aspect. You can actually do that here. You know, do you go against Fifth Corps and attack Fula Gap, or do you go across the North German plain? You know, which strategy works more often than not? That's what's really kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, one of the classic questions that you face here, when the Polish front activates, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to stop and take out West Berlin? That's a swing of 4 victory points. That's almost 1 victory level. Do you put it behind the Northeast German front? Do you put it behind the Southeast German front? Do you even send it south to help the Czechs? Do you send it up to take out Denmark? I'm not going to tell you what I like. I'll let you explore for yourself. But I mean, that alone is a fascinating question in this strategic surprise scenario. Lots of options. All right, folks. Well, Mo, thank you very much for the chance to do this lunch and learn. And gentlemen, thank you very much for attending, and I wish you happy playing. My email is bruce@brucemaxwell.com. If you have any questions about the game or the rules, please don't hesitate to email me, or I do check my Designer Platts channel here on Discord also every couple of days. So that was it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And also thank you, Fred, for chiming in as well. And no, we didn't give out lunch, Fred. You didn't miss out on that because you were asking about was there a lunch because Bruce said the lunch and learn. But we'll send you an Applebee's coupon. It's an inside joke.
Thank you.
That's great. All right. Take care, folks. God bless.